We all think having absolute power would be awesome. You could make any rule you want. But history shows that when you give someone that kind of authority, things don't just get epic, they get spectacularly stupid. We're not talking about clever political moves today. We're talking about kings so bored, so paranoid, or so completely out of their minds that their demands defy all logic. From weaponized polar bears to legally enforced sock matching, this is what happens when the person in charge has absolutely no one to tell them. That's a terrible idea. 1. A rich guy got so bored he demanded his court treat a random drunk peasant like a king, just to see what would happen. This wasn't a prank show. This was Duke Philip the Good's idea of a fun afternoon. His men picked a guy out of the gutter, swapped his rags for silk, and let him wake up to a 5-star feast. For one glorious day, this confused dude was the center of the universe, with servants bowing and musicians playing. He probably thought he'd hit the afterlife lottery. The punchline? Once he passed out again, they dumped him right back in the alley. Imagine trying to explain to your friends the next day that you were a duke for 24 hours but have absolutely zero proof. That's a new level of psychological torment for entertainment. 2. King Henry III demanded his pet polar bear be allowed to go fishing for its own dinner in the middle of the River Thames. Let that sink in. While regular Londoners were just trying to get across the river without falling in the sewage, they also had to dodge a literal Arctic predator on a very long chain. This wasn't some cute zoo animal. It was the king's personal semi-aquatic attack dog. Can you imagine the conversations? "Sorry I'm late for work, honey. The king's bear was blocking the bridge again." It's the most gangster pet ownership move in history. Forget guard dogs. Henry had a guard bear that provided its own lunch and terrified an entire city. 3. In the Middle Ages, rich guys wore shoes with points so ridiculously long, up to 2 feet, that kings literally had to make laws to stop them. These poulains were the ultimate fashion disaster. You couldn't run, you couldn't fight, and you definitely couldn't kneel in church without taking someone's eye out. So kings created a fashion police state, where the length of your shoe toe was dictated by your social rank. A prince could have a 2-foot point, while a lowly peasant was stuck with a pathetic 6 inches. It was a government-mandated shoe-flexing hierarchy. Imagine getting fined because your footwear was deemed too ambitious for your station. 4. King Henry VIII, between beheading wives and starting his own church, demanded his nobles follow a strict sock-matching law. If you showed up to his court, your socks and garters had to be in perfect color harmony with the rest of your outfit, or you'd get fined. This wasn't a friendly suggestion from a fashion blog. It was the law of the land. The man was running a country, dealing with international politics, and still found time to be the ultimate sock tyrant. It proves that absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it also makes you obsessively worried about whether a duke's legwear is the right shade of crimson. It's micromanagement at its most absurd. 5. When King Francis I of France received a rhinoceros as a gift, he didn't just put it in a pen. He demanded it get a full-scale military parade through the streets. We're talking trumpeters, honor guards, and the whole shebang, all for a 2-ton horned beast that had no idea what was going on. Legend says he even demanded his armorer craft a suit of custom golden armor for the rhino. What a nightmare job that must have been. This was the 16th century equivalent of buying a Bugatti and hiring a marching band to follow you everywhere you go. It was the most ridiculously extra way to say, "My new pet is cooler than your entire country." 6. The most powerful and sought-after job in the Tudor court, one that nobles would kill for, was the groom of the stool. The job description? You were demanded to personally assist the king every time he used the toilet. Yes, that meant wiping. But it was the best job because it gave you totally private, unfiltered access to the king when he was at his most contemplative. You could ask for favors, pass on gossip, and influence national policy, all while standing in the royal bathroom. It was the ultimate power move, becoming the kingdom's most influential man by being the official royal poop supervisor. Proximity to power is a hell of a thing. 7. King Charles VI of France had a mental breakdown and became completely convinced his body was made of fragile glass. He lived in constant, paralyzing fear that he would shatter into a million pieces. He demanded that no one touch him and even had his tailor sew iron rods into his clothes to act as an internal support system, like rebar and concrete. Imagine trying to rule a country when you believe a strong gust of wind could break you. His entire court had to tiptoe around him, probably terrified to even sneeze too loudly in his presence. It's hard to be an absolute monarch when you're also a human wine glass. 8. During medieval feasts, knights were demanded to make incredibly serious, binding vows on a live pheasant. They'd bring out a decorated, very confused bird, and a knight would place his hand on it and swear to do something insane, like be the first man to storm an enemy castle. It was a bizarre mix of a legal contract and a drunken dare, with a terrified bird acting as the notary. Imagine the peer pressure. You have to one-up the last guy's vow, all while trying not to get pecked. It's a wonder anyone ever made it to dessert. I swear on this chicken I will not rest until I have avenged my honor. The pheasant, meanwhile, is just hoping nobody swears to eat it. 9. Queen Catherine de' Medici demanded a private, soundproofed room be built for the sole purpose of her having a good cry. This wasn't just a quiet corner, it was a dedicated chamber of tears. This room was reportedly kept dimly lit with red light and scented with melancholy herbs to achieve the perfect sad vibe. It's the most extra goth thing a queen could possibly do. While the king was out running the country, Catherine had her own personal rage room, but for weeping. It's like an emo kid's dream bedroom, but with a royal budget. You have to admire the commitment to being dramatically sad in a specially designed, professionally scented sorrow dungeon. 10. Before riding into a life-or-death battle, Emperor Barbarossa demanded his fully armored knights perform a final ritual. They had to kneel down and kiss his boot. This wasn't a friendly fist bump, it was a non-negotiable symbol of absolute submission. Imagine being a 7-foot-tall knight covered in steel, ready to face down an army. But first, you have to get on your knees and smooch your boss's dusty footwear. It's the most awkward team huddle in history. It completely drains the pre-battle hype. Are you ready to fight for glory? Yes, sire, right after I kiss your boot. Can you just hold still for a sec? 11. King Richard II of England was so utterly disgusted by his courtiers wiping their snot on their sleeves that he basically demanded the invention of the handkerchief. He was a man of fine tastes, trapped in a world of gross medieval hygiene. He couldn't stand the sight of it anymore and pushed for the popularization of personal portable cloths for nose blowing. He was essentially the world's first germaphobe influencer, forcing his entire court to level up their hygiene game. It's a strange legacy to have. Not for winning wars, but for being the king who finally said, "For God's sake, people, use a tissue." 12. At medieval fairs, they had a system of instant justice called pie powder courts, a name which basically means dusty feet courts. The king demanded these pop-up courts be set up to deliver verdicts on the spot. If a merchant got scammed, they didn't have to wait months for a trial. They could drag the offender to the tent and get a ruling in minutes. It was like Judge Judy, but way faster and for people who hadn't bathed in weeks. It's honestly a brilliant idea. We should bring this back. Got a dispute with your neighbor? To the dusty feet court, verdict delivered before you can even finish your argument. 13. The French King Louis XI was so superstitious that he demanded his doctors kiss his protective amulets before they were even allowed to treat him. And the amulets weren't just some pretty crystals, they were made from ground-up Egyptian mummy dust. So, before a highly trained physician could check the king's pulse, he first had to show respect to a pouch of zombie powder. It's a wild mix of royal paranoia and voodoo medicine. I know you went to medical school, but first I need you to make out with this ancient corpse dust to prove you're not going to poison me. 14. In a legendary power move, Pope Gregory VII demanded that the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV, stand barefoot in a blizzard for 3 straight days to beg for forgiveness. The most powerful political leader in Europe was forced to stand outside the Pope's castle gate like a kid who missed his curfew. This wasn't just saying sorry, This was a full-blown theatrical humiliation designed to show everyone who was really in charge. It's the ultimate, I'm not talking to you until you've almost died of hypothermia tactic. You know you've messed up bad when the punishment involves frostbite. 15. King Edward III of England acted as a tyrannical fashion police officer, demanding that specific social classes could only wear certain colors and fabrics. And the punishment for violating this dress code was brutal. If you were a peasant caught wearing a fancy silk outfit reserved for nobility, guards could literally strip the illegal clothes right off your body in the middle of the street. It was a state-sanctioned public shaming for the crime of having too much style for your tax bracket. Imagine getting publicly undressed because your new tunic was deemed too luxurious. It's a whole new level of dress code strictly enforced. 16. While real knighthood was dying out, King René of Anjou demanded his court participate in absurdly theatrical tournaments based on fantasy novels. This wasn't serious jousting, this was mandatory LARPing for grown men. He forced his battle-hardened knights to dress up as mythological heroes and characters from romance stories and act out elaborate, scripted battles. You can just imagine some grizzled war veteran complaining to his squire, "For 10 years I fought in the wars and now the king demands I dress up as Sir Galahad's sparkly unicorn. This is embarrassing." 17. Empress Irene of Byzantium took the concept of a hostile takeover to a horrifying new family level. She wasn't content with just being regent for her son, the emperor. She wanted the top job all to herself. So she demanded her own son be captured and brutally blinded, a common practice at the time to make someone ineligible to rule. This is the most savage HR move in the history of monarchies. It's one thing to tell your kid to get out of your office, but it's another thing entirely to have him permanently disabled so you can take his corner office with the nice view. It's the ultimate statement of, I brought you into this world, and I can take you out of the line of succession. Family game night must have been incredibly tense at their palace. 18. The French monarchy came up with one of the most annoying taxes in history, the gabelle. They demanded that every single citizen over the age of 8 had to buy a minimum amount of official, state-approved salt every single week, at a ridiculously inflated price. It didn't matter if you already had salt or if you were on a low-sodium diet. The king demanded you buy his salt. It was like a mandatory subscription service you could never cancel. Imagine the government forcing you to buy a weekly quota of something completely random, like 7 state-mandated avocados, whether you wanted them or not. It was a brilliant, deeply irritating way to squeeze money out of everyone, and it made the French people famously salty for centuries. 19. While his kingdom of Castile was teetering on the brink of a major national crisis, King Alfonso X had his priorities firmly in order. He demanded his best scholars and scribes drop everything they were doing, trivial things like saving the economy, and instead create a massive, luxurious, illustrated encyclopedia about games. Not war games, but chess, dice, and backgammon. The kingdom could be on fire, but Alfonso was determined to document the perfect opening chess move. This is procrastination on a royal scale. It's like the captain of the Titanic demanding his crew stop looking for icebergs and help him finish a really tricky crossword puzzle. 20. The coronation banquet for King Edward II featured some seriously aggressive dinner theater. He demanded that during the feast, a fully armored knight on a war horse ride into the hall and act as his personal hype man. This knight would loudly challenge anyone who doubted the king's right to the throne to a duel to the death, right there and then. It's a bold way to handle criticism. Forget a lengthy debate. Edward's policy was to let a guy with a giant sword handle any complaints. It's the medieval equivalent of starting a meeting by having a huge bodyguard ask if anyone has a problem with the new quarterly report. It really cuts down on follow-up questions. 21. Queen Blanche of Castile, mother of the future King Louis IX, took helicopter parenting to a bizarre and silent new level. She demanded that her children's royal tutors teach them in absolute, complete silence. That wasn't all. The tutors were also under strict orders never to make eye contact with the young royals. How do you even teach history or math under these conditions? Was it all done through interpretive dance and elaborate charades? It must have been the most awkward and ineffective classroom environment imaginable. Today's lesson is on the Norman conquest. I will now act it out using only hand gestures. Please, do not look directly at me. 22. After the Black Death wiped out about half of Europe's population, peasants who survived suddenly found their labor was in high demand. So naturally, they asked for better pay. The King of England's response was a swift and decisive no. He enacted the Statute of Laborers, which made it illegal for employers to offer higher wages or for workers to demand them. It was a massive nationwide wage freeze. Imagine surviving the most catastrophic plague in human history, only to have your king demand you go back to work for the same garbage pay. By law, it was the ultimate kick them while they're down move from the 1% of the 14th century. 23. Duke Visconti of Milan was so disgusted by the thought of walking among the general public that he demanded a massive, fortified private bridge be built over a river. This wasn't just a simple walkway. It was an enormous, covered structure connecting his castle to a country residence just so he and his fancy court wouldn't have to breathe the same air as the common folk below. This is next-level social distancing. It's the architectural equivalent of paying $1 million to avoid making small talk with your neighbors. You have to respect the sheer, unapologetic arrogance of building a huge piece of infrastructure purely out of social anxiety and contempt for poor people. 24. Vlad the Impaler, a man not known for his subtle leadership style, had a unique test for the integrity of his people. He placed a solid gold goblet in the middle of his main town square and demanded that no one steal it. Now, this wasn't an appeal to their better nature. It was an unspoken threat. Everyone knew that the punishment for touching that goblet would be something agonizingly pointy and probably fatal. It stayed there, untouched, for his entire reign. It's less a symbol of public honesty and more a monument to public terror. It's like a company leaving free donuts in the break room, but also hinting that the box is rigged with a bomb. Sure, no one will take one, but you can't exactly call it a healthy work environment. 25. English kings repeatedly demanded their subjects stop playing fun games like football and hockey. Why? Because they were convinced everyone was getting soft. Their logic was that every hour a young man spent kicking an inflated pig's bladder around was an hour he wasn't practicing with a longbow. So they banned it. This was a nationwide no fun allowed policy, driven by national security. It's like your dad taking away your Xbox and demanding you do push-ups instead, but on a national scale and backed by the force of law. You can just picture some peasant getting tackled mid-game, not by another player, but by a royal guard yelling, "Drop that ball and pick up a bow. You're weakening the kingdom." 26. Being a king meant being so paranoid about poison that you had to demand a personal food taster for every single meal. This was a formal, official position, often held by a nobleman. His only job was to eat a piece of your food and take a sip of your drink before you did, just to see if he would drop dead. It's the most stressful dining experience imaginable. Every meal is a gamble. The job title sounds fancy, a cupbearer or a taster, but the job description is basically human guinea pig. It's the ultimate sign of trust issues when your first question before eating a grape is, "Hey Bob, eat this first and let me know if you start convulsing." 27. This might be the most wonderfully absurd royal power flex of all time. The English crown demanded that all unmarked mute swans swimming in the nation's open waters are the personal property of the monarch. Not just the swans on royal land, but all of them, everywhere. To enforce this bizarre claim, they created a yearly ceremony called the Swan Upping, where royal officials literally row up the Thames in fancy boats to count the Queen's birds and mark the new ones. Imagine trying to explain this to a tourist. Yes, all those angry white birds belong to her. No, you can't touch them. They have more rights than you do. It is the peak of declaring ownership over something just because you can. 28. King Charles V of France was so dependent on astrology that he refused to make any major royal decisions without a green light from his stargazers. Going to war? Let me check with my astrologer. Signing a new law? Hang on, what does Saturn have to say about it? He essentially demanded his entire kingdom's fate be run by a group of guys interpreting planetary movements. Imagine being a general, ready to launch a surprise attack, only to be told the invasion is off because Mercury is in retrograde and it's a bad time for communication. The entire French government was at the mercy of a cosmic weather forecast. It's a miracle they ever got anything done. 29. As if surviving a medieval shipwreck wasn't traumatic enough, many monarchs had a law that was a massive slap in the face to any survivors. They demanded that any ship that wrecked on their coastline, along with its entire cargo, automatically became the king's personal property. So you could wash ashore, having lost everything and everyone, only to be met by a royal official who is essentially there to claim your floating wreckage as a prize. It's the ultimate vulture move. There's no finders keepers when the finder is the king. It's a brutal policy that basically says, sorry for your loss, but thanks for the free stuff. 30. Isabella d'Este, a powerful Renaissance Marchioness, was the ultimate art client from hell. She hounded the greatest artists of her time, like Leonardo da Vinci and Perugino, with relentless demands. She wouldn't just commission a painting, she would send dozens of letters micromanaging every single detail. She dictated the exact subject matter, the size, the colors, and even the specific emotions the figures in the painting should be displaying. She once sent a contract so detailed, it was basically a paint-by-numbers guide for a master artist. Imagine being Leonardo da Vinci, a genius, getting notes that say, "Can you make the cherub look a bit less smug and more pensively joyful?" Yusbom. 31. King Magnus of Norway must have been the world's lightest sleeper because he demanded the creation of official peace zones around his royal homes. Within these designated areas, there were harsh legal penalties for anyone caught making loud noises, fighting, or generally disturbing his royal nap time. He essentially turned his entire neighborhood into a legally enforced library. You could get in serious trouble for having a loud party, a squeaky wagon wheel, or probably even for laughing too hard. It's the ultimate get-off-my-lawn power move. But instead of just a lawn, it was a huge chunk of the city, and the consequence wasn't a grumpy glare but an actual punishment from the king. 32. After he took over England, William the Conqueror looked around and demanded that huge swaths of the country become his personal, exclusive hunting club. He created the forest laws, which turned vast areas into royal forests. But the scariest part was the punishment for poaching. If you were a starving peasant and you were caught hunting a deer to feed your family, the king's law demanded you be blinded. Not fined, not jailed, but blinded. It's such a ridiculously disproportionate punishment. He valued his hobby more than a subject's eyesight. It sent a very clear message. The deer in this forest are more important than you are, so don't even think about it. 33. What happens when a loyal royal servant gets too old to work? A pension? A nice retirement cottage? No. If you were a medieval king, you demanded the local monastery take care of them for the rest of their life. This was called a corrodi, and it was essentially the king's personal retirement plan that he forced upon monks. Imagine a monastery, a place of quiet prayer and contemplation, suddenly being forced to accept a grumpy, retired knight as their new permanent roommate. This old soldier is now their problem, eating their food, drinking their wine, and probably telling the same boring war stories over and over again. The monks, who signed up for a life of peaceful devotion, were legally obligated to become unpaid geriatric nurses for the king's cast-offs. It was a truly ingenious and terrible royal demand. 34. Imagine you're a merchant who has sailed your ship full of valuable goods into a friendly port. Suddenly, the king's men show up, and they don't want to trade. They want your ship, your cargo, everything. This was the right of angourie, a bizarre international law where a king demanded the right to seize any private property, including foreign ships and carts, if he needed it for a war. It was legalized grand theft auto on a national scale. They wouldn't even give you a receipt. It was just, the king needs this for the war effort, thanks for your involuntary donation, try not to get stranded. It's the ultimate power move, turning the act of straight-up robbery into a respectable legal tool of the state just by calling it a royal prerogative. 35. Queen Elizabeth I was the inventor of catfishing, centuries before the internet. As she got older, she became obsessed with her public image and demanded that all official portraits show her as a young, flawless, and beautiful monarch. She created a mask of youth image that had very little to do with reality. Artists weren't allowed to paint what they saw. They were demanded to paint the myth. And if an artist dared to create an unflattering portrait that showed her wrinkles or aging, she would have it tracked down and destroyed. This was the 16th century version of frantically untagging yourself from a bad photo on Facebook, but with the full power of the English crown to erase the evidence. She was basically photoshopping her life in real time using oil paints and royal decrees. 36. King Roger II of Sicily was a geography nerd with absolute power, which is a dangerous combination. He demanded his best scholars undertake a monumental task: create the most accurate map of the entire known world. This wasn't a casual weekend project. It was a grueling, 15-year-long royal mandate. His scholars were forced to interview thousands of sailors, merchants, and travelers from across Europe, Asia, and Africa, compiling every scrap of information to create one perfect map. You can imagine the king tapping his foot impatiently for a decade and a half, asking, "Is it done yet?" It was the world's most stressful and longest-running group project, all driven by one king's obsessive demand for cartographic perfection. 37. Medieval kings had a clever way to get out of having to rely on their powerful and often rebellious knights for military service. They came up with something called scutage, or shield tax. The king would demand that his knights either show up for battle or pay a special tax instead. This gave the knights a choice: risk their lives on the battlefield or just pay the king to go away. Most chose to pay. The king then used that money to hire professional mercenaries who were loyal only to him and his gold, not to their own lands or titles. It was a brilliant and sneaky way to build a private army that was far more reliable than a bunch of arrogant nobles who might have their own agendas. 38. Paying taxes in cash is boring. Medieval English kings demanded a more stylish form of payment called the wardrobe tax. Instead of sending coins to the treasury, sheriffs from different regions were required to pay their taxes in kind by providing specific luxury goods for the royal wardrobe. One region might be demanded to supply fine silks, another had to provide warm furs, and another might be responsible for high-quality leather for the king's shoes. It was like the king was running a nationwide subscription box service where his subjects were forced to keep him fashionable. It's a genius idea, ensuring the king was always the best-dressed man in the room, all paid for by a very specific and demanding tax system. 39. King Louis IX of France was so famously pious that he demanded his nobles give up their flashy, expensive clothes and dress like humble peasants instead. He wanted his entire court to adopt a minimalist aesthetic, wearing plain, undyed wool. It was a nightmare for the fashion-conscious nobility. The king once caught a knight wearing a fancy embroidered outfit and, as a punishment, demanded he donate the entire ensemble to a local monastery on the spot. Imagine being publicly shamed and having your expensive new coat given away because the king thought you were being too extra. It was a war on glamour, waged by a monarch who thought high fashion was a sin. 40. The deeply religious King Philip II of Spain wanted to build a palace, but he also wanted to make a very specific and morbid point. He demanded that his colossal new palace monastery, El Escorial, be built in the precise shape of the gridiron on which St. Lawrence was supposedly martyred by being roasted alive. So he built his home to look like a giant barbecue grill as a tribute to a saint. You have to wonder what it was like for the architects. So you want a grand hall, a library, and you want it all to have the architectural vibe of a cooking implement used for torture? Got it. It's one of the most intensely devout and spectacularly weird architectural demands in history. 41. Emperor Nikephoros, the first of Byzantium, apparently woke up one day and decided to try the dumbest diplomatic strategy in history. He demanded that the incredibly powerful Caliph Harun al-Rashid, ruler of the Abbasid Caliphate, give him a refund on all the tribute money his predecessor had paid to keep the peace. As if that wasn't insane enough, the letter he sent reportedly called the Caliph a slave and insisted that the Caliph should be the one paying him. This is the political equivalent of walking into a lion's den and demanding it give you back the gazelle it just ate. The Caliph's response was swift and terrifying. He famously wrote on the back of the letter itself, "You will not hear my reply, you will see it," and then immediately launched a massive invasion that completely crushed Nikephoros' army and ravaged his lands. It was a self-inflicted disaster of epic proportions, proving that arrogance can be a far more destructive weapon than any sword. 42. This is one of history's most misunderstood stories. King Canute didn't demand the ocean stop because he was a delusional egomaniac. He did it because he was sick of his own employees. His court was filled with sycophants who constantly flattered him, telling him he was so powerful that all of nature would bend to his will. Utterly fed up with this non-stop bootlicking, Canute demanded his throne be carried to the seashore. In front of everyone, he commanded the incoming tide to halt. Of course, the tide ignored him completely and proceeded to soak the king's feet. Canute then turned to his stunned and silent courtiers and gave them a legendary lecture on how pathetic a king's power is compared to the true power of God and nature. It was an incredibly theatrical and very wet way of telling his entire staff to stop being so annoying. 43. The monarchs of France demanded a level of scented luxury that is hard to comprehend. They employed a personal perfumer, a high-ranking artist whose sole job was to create a unique, bespoke fragrance for the king or queen every single day. But this scent wasn't just for their body. The royal demand extended to having their gloves perfumed, their furniture perfumed, and in a truly absurd twist, even their pets perfumed. In an age when bathing was infrequent at best, perfume was less about smelling nice and more about waging chemical warfare against the background stench of reality. Imagine the pressure on that perfumer, trying to design a scent that says, "I am the divine ruler of France," while also being strong enough to cover up the fact that the royal poodle hasn't had a bath in 6 months. 44. This is perhaps the most infamous and fiercely debated feudal demand in all of history: the right of the first night. In theory, this supposed right, known as droit du seigneur, allowed a feudal lord to demand he spend the wedding night with the new bride of any of his vassals. It was the ultimate horrifying expression of a lord's total power over the people who lived on his land. Now, most modern historians argue that this was likely not a widespread, legally enforced right, but more of a terrifying myth or a symbol of the utter tyranny of the ruling class. But whether it was a real law or just something that happened through pure abuse of power, the fact that the story exists at all tells you everything you need to know about how absolute the power of some lords was. It remains the darkest and most disturbing job perk ever claimed by a boss. So there you have it. Proof that unlimited power doesn't just corrupt, it makes people profoundly, creatively bizarre. Now for the real question, and be honest with yourself. Is this behavior just a flaw of ancient rulers? Or is it a fundamental bug in the human brain that's unlocked by absolute authority? Put another way, if we gave you a crown tomorrow, how long would it take before you demanded all the squirrels in your neighborhood wear tiny hats? I want to see your most cynical answers in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey into royal madness, demonstrate your superior judgment by hitting the like button and subscribing for more historical absurdities.